The 30s was generally a miserable time to live. It was marked by the stock market crash known as the Great Depression. The Great Depression began on October 29, 1929, on a day known as Black Tuesday, when the stock market crashed. People were using credit and buying on margin, spending so much money that didn't even exist that stocks suddenly deflated over 75%. The Depression lasted for the entirety of the 30s, for 10 full years. The worst year of the Depression was 1933. Even after the initial crash, stocks dropped 80% between 1930 and 1933. At the height of the Depression, 12,000 people were losing their jobs daily. By 1940, 200,000 people had emigrated to California, and a whopping 2.5 million had left the Great Plains. The Great Depression led to widespread poverty, starvation, and homelessness. To escape their miserable lives, people looked toward cheap entertainment. Movies, radio, and car shows were just a few of the many sources for entertainment. Though it was a time of complete economic failure, the 1930s gave rise to a new era in entertainment. Movies, radio, sports, and shows were all very popular. One of, if not the most memorable films of the time was The Wizard of Oz, starring Judy Garland, Frank Morgan, and Ray Bolger. Opening in theaters on August 25, 1939, it quickly became a success and was nominated for 6 Academy Awards. Another notable film was the 1938 full-length adaptation of Snow White. Costing $1.5 million to make, it was an instant hit, making $8 million, the most any movie had ever made at the time. One of the most significant stories of the 1930s became Gone with the Wind. Written by Margaret Mitchell in 1936, the book became an instant hit in America. It became such a sensation that it was adapted into a movie, and a very successful one at that, beating The Wizard of Oz for the award for Best Picture. Entertainment was crucial in the 1930s because it provided a good escape from the Great Depression. The Parker Brothers introduced a new board game in 1935. One of the most famous games ever created, they called it Monopoly. Monopoly was such a success because it allowed people to pretend they were rich and powerful, something they most likely were not. At the time of the Great Depression, feeling economically sound was a coveted emotion, even if only in a game. Probably the most significant form of entertainment during the 1930s was the radio. Since TV shows were not widely available to most people, the radio was not only a source for nightly news, it was a medium for nightly shows as well. Popular radio programs included mysteries and superhero shows. As a matter of fact, the character Superman was invented in the 1930s as a radio character, but perhaps the single most famous radio broadcast was a radio adaptation of H.G. Wells's book, War of the Worlds, about an unstoppable Martian attack on Earth. Many people thought the attack was real, and it created mass hysteria across New York and New Jersey, where the show was aired. The 1930s were dubbed the Golden Age of Baseball for good reasons. By far, the most popular sport then was baseball. A relatively cheap sport to play and to watch, baseball was an escape from the Great Depression. Stadiums lured people in with inexpensive food, free admission for women, and contests to win free groceries and money. The Baseball Hall of Fame was created in 1936, inducting some of the most famous baseball players of all time in the 30s, including Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig. And speaking of Babe Ruth, his retirement from the MLB caused quite a stir. But one of the biggest news stories of the 30s was the 1936 Olympics. Held in Berlin, Germany, many people felt the Olympics should have been boycotted because Germany was well into the Holocaust by that point, and boycotting the Olympics could have delegitimized the Nazis' power. And though they had a chance, the U.S. and other powerful nations did not choose to boycott the Olympics. American runner Jesse Owens won 4 gold medals. Another significant sports story from the 1930s was in boxing. James J. Braddock, with 24 losses to his name, defeated world champion boxer Max Baer to take the championship title. When the 30s arrived, gone was the boyish style of the 20s. The ideal 30s woman was tall and thin, with a small waist and hips. Style-wise, women wore more fitted clothes, with lots of padding in the shoulders. They pinned their hair close to their heads. Women wore dresses all the time, casual around the house and more formal when going out. Trench coats were big in style, with both men's and women. And just as women wore dresses, men wore ties and dress pants. Fedoras were big in style, as were striped suits. America's involvement in World War II began in 1939 after Japan invaded China. There was tension after Japan attacked Manchuria, but when war officially broke out between Japan and China, the U.S. knew it had to pick a side. When Japan attacked China, even after the U.S. told them not to, The U.S. knew it had to side with China. Meanwhile, Hitler and Stalin signed the Non-Aggression Pact. With Axis powers threatening global domination, the U.S. had to take action. FDR asked the Senate to revise neutrality laws so new munitions could be sold to France and Britain, but eventually all pretense for neutrality was lost. America had officially entered World War II. President Franklin Roosevelt was one of the most significant presidents in U.S. history. Being inaugurated in 1933, he inherited the Great Depression from Hoover. With such a big economic upset, he needed a plan that would work to fix things. This plan came in the form of the New Deal. The New Deal focused on relief, recovery, and reform to help stabilize the economy. In his first 100 days, he proposed so many new bills and plans for action that at the time became known as the 100 Days Congress. This 100 Days Congress set the precedent for future presidents to start taking action as soon as they are sworn into office. The New Deal included, among many things, Social Security and the CCC. Social Security reduced taxpayers' money to provide benefits to the sick, unemployed, and old of age. The Social Security Act alleviated much stress from the people during the Great Depression. The CCC, or Civilian Conservation Corps, was a federally funded program to help young men get government jobs helping the environment. Many of these jobs were seasonal, but they provided opportunity nonetheless. FDR was pretty successful in ending the Great Depression because it did eventually get better, and people must have liked his efforts because he was the only president in U.S. history to ever be elected 3 terms. For a second term, he beat his opponent Alfred Landon with 523 to 8 electoral votes and with 23 million popular votes. FDR's first inaugural address is considered one of the best speeches in American history. The following is an excerpt from it.
This is a day of national consecration, and I am certain that on this day my fellow Americans expect that on my induction into the presidency, I will address them with a candor and a decision which the present situation of our people impels. So first of all, let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror which paralyzes needed efforts to convert retreat into advance. We face our common difficulties. They concern, thank God, only material things. The withered leaves of industrial enterprise lie on every side. Farmers find no market for their produce, and the savings of many years in thousands of families are gone. More important, a host of unemployed citizens face the grim problem of existence, and an equally great number toil with little return. Only a foolish optimist can deny the dark realities of the moment. And yet we are stricken by no plague of locusts. Compared with the perils which our forefathers conquered, we have still much to be thankful for. Nature still offers her bounty, and human efforts have multiplied it.
The Dust Bowl, the single most significant event of the 1930s, it was a natural and man-made disaster in the Midwest. Overcultivation of the land during World War I caused the topsoil to dry and loosen, and when the winds came through the area, they picked up the loose soil and caused the worst dust storm in U.S. history. The Dust Bowl was a series of black blizzards, blowing dirt so forcefully it was not only unsafe, it reduced visibility to none. Several hundred people died from inhaling dirt, which caused influenza, asthma, cough spasms, and bronchitis, among other respiratory problems. The Dust Bowl obliterated 150,000 square miles of land through Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Colorado, and New Mexico. It lasted for years. The worst of the storms occurred on April 14, 1935. Dust traveled at speeds of 100 miles per hour, and the storm reached 200 miles off the Atlantic coast. It was the day after the storm, on April 15, 1935, that the Dust Bowl was given its name by a news reporter. In the wake of the destruction, not much survived the Dust Bowl, but one poem in particular managed to make it. It is called Dustbowl and is arguably one of the greatest poems ever written. The Dust Bowl winds blowing, send us Okies going, out west for a job, one for Bill, Sue, and Bob. To California we go because work here is slow. We need relief soon. The Dust Bowl let up soon. The piling sand dunes are driving us crazy. We don't try to be lazy, but work is all out because of this drought. We need relief now. Oh, Roosevelt, please, Roosevelt, send us some water, some wood, or some felt. Let us return home to Oklahoma. We're sick of claustrophobia. California's too crowded, but we're all work-bounded. Please, send us relief. As the poem mentions, the victims of the Dust Bowl needed help. 3 million people became homeless, a number similar to that during the Great Depression. Also similar to the Depression, hundreds of thousands of workers were forced to flee to California to find a job. These migrants were called Okies because many of them were from Oklahoma. California business owners would often travel to regions affected by the Dust Bowl and hand out flyers, like the one on the screen, that would often glorify the working conditions in California. So many people flooded to the area that in actuality there were not really enough jobs for everyone. Like with all natural disasters, the Dust Bowl eventually let up. The Soil Conservation Science Agency was formed in 1935 to help promote rehabilitation of farmlands to ensure nothing like the Dust Bowl would happen again.
Seal my heart and break my pride. I've nowhere to stand and now nowhere to hide. Align my heart, my body, my mind to face what I've done and do my time.
The 1930s was a turning point in American history. Wedged between the Roaring Twenties and World War II, the 30s was a time where most Americans faced extreme hardships, trying to get by one day at a time. This decade shows the strength of the American people to overcome obstacles, even when faced with an uncertain future. It shows that we, as Americans, are able to escape constant fear while we face uncertainty. In the 30s, the people found their escape in entertainment, listening to the radio, watching movies and sporting events, and going to car shows. Certainly some of the most prominent figures from the decade were movie stars, notably Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. Other prominent figures, people that shaped U.S. history during the 1930s, were Presidents Herbert Hoover and FDR and Adolf Hitler, who shaped American foreign policy significantly. Reflecting on the decade, we can learn something from the people who lived through the Great Depression. We can learn that we shouldn't take anything for granted because we don't know when it will disappear.